hope this doesn't come off sounding as corny, but I was actually feeling a lot of gratitude for football on Sunday despite defeat. I don't know if that's because Remembrance Day is looming and this is a time of reflection for many of us. But then I started thinking, like, what the hell would I do without football? Where would I fill the time, the anticipation of games, attending or viewing games, then dissecting them with your friends, driving your kids to football or coaching it like I did on Saturday? And so I'm trying to stay grounded on defeats because losses are kind of like little reminders to savor every single victory, treasure them, and don't just expect that they're coming or that you're somehow entitled to them. Still, Villa were weren't they? Let's get into it. Nottingham Forest 2, Aston Villa 0. Welcome to the Parlour, and before I get into the nuts and bolts of the Forest match, you may have seen that Rob McKenzie, who was a key individual in our recruitment department, has moved on from Aston Villa and is rumoured to be joining Johan Lange at Tottenham Hotspur. And I'm not sure if it's one of those ones where he's looking around and he's going, yeah, I think my time is about to be done. Maybe I should look at something else. Or whether Monchi would have said, you know, Rob, I want my people. No offense, but that's just what happens in major regime changes. It's totally normal. And the problem with guys like McKenzie and Johan Lange, for that matter, is that we have no idea what role or what specific involvement they have in any of our captures of recent history. I'm going to be very curious, though, to see how our two clubs evolve over the next 3 to 5 years. And obviously, good luck to the guy. He had a very, very solid reputation and pedigree. Welcome officially to the Holy Trinity Show, which features our senior correspondent, Samir Gaby, at the City Ground, reporting with his lovely wife, Shakila, both of them busting out some handsome retro Umbro gear, as we look at the house that Cloughie helped build. And I wonder if there's still some Brian Clough stardust sprinkled in and around the City Ground, because it's a very difficult place to go and earn 3 points. I find this ground fascinating. Did you know that in 1968, the old main wooden grandstand burned down during a game? And unlike the horrific events of May 11th, 1985 at Valley Parade in Bradford, not a single person was even injured. Everybody escaped, but the grandstand burned down. And what we're left here today is, I think, a Premier League venue and one that belongs there. And incredibly, right across the River Trent is the home of arch rivals Notts County, who are starting to make their rise through the Football League again. And I find those stories infinitely fascinating. Let's get to the key numbers, as Unai Emery's birthday weekend was ruined. It was Wes Eden's birthday recently as well. I looked at corners as my featured stat from this game, and if you were to look at these numbers, you would have thought it was Aston Villa winning comfortably on the day, and that just goes to show you that sometimes statistics really are irrelevant. So that leads neatly to a recurring issue. Last week we did score from a set piece, an Austin McPhee special, but when is the last time we've scored directly from a corner? Well, I could tell you, actually, it was April when Tyrone Mings did it against Fulham, the only goal. But in terms of away goals scored directly from corners, you have to go all the way back to the game at Everton, where Emi Buendia flicked home just before halftime. And we had 10 corners in this game. And against Everton at home earlier this year, we were almost playing every single corner short to make them have to solve different problems and approach them with different angles. And since then, it seems like the majority of our corners are once again just strong balls played into the penalty area with the hopes of somebody getting on the end of it. The only problem being we have very few people that can A, either get on the end of it, or B, direct it on goal. If we can shore up that part of our game and even just score once a month from a corner directly, think about what that might do to our results. Oh, touching and wonderful moment, frankly, when young 16-year-old bugler Caden Story came out to deliver the last post in front of 20,000 at the City Ground with Armistice Day coming up this weekend. And this was already a very emotional time in the city of Nottingham because of the horrific, ghastly, and frankly traumatic death of Adam Johnson of the Panthers. I mean, if you were there to witness that, I can only imagine how awful that would have been. And Steve Cooper actually addressed it in his pre-match availability. He said he and his team were shaken to the core, as was the entire city of Nottingham, which was rallying together. So it's already quite raw there. And I don't know what happened to young Caden, but he lost his way, and the crowd immediately picked up on it and gave him the most uproarious applause and support. And he's just in bits at this stage. All the players from both teams come over, put their arms around him, pat him on the head. You know, things like that, and the Adam Johnson tribute in this game. This is what football does so well, and it's why we can't live without it. Let's get straight into it. Big issue number 3, obvious options. I was watching this game while messaging my Canadian friend and England tour sponsor from this spring, Richard Davies from Midland Honda, and Richard was raging. He was losing it. He was snapping. Lights were going off, bells and buzzers were ringing. Make wholesale changes, Richard said with a barrage of exclamation marks. And he wouldn't have been the only one. Well, that got me to thinking. You know, apart from the very obvious Leon Bailey for Nicolo Zaniolo swap, which occurred at halftime, what other changes could you make to change the game? And what qualities, more importantly, do we need in a situation like that where we are playing a mid to low block team that's got its spaces right and has its work rate spot on? And this is a problem. You could say, well, Youri Tielemans comes in, but is Tielemans significantly different or adds more than either Luisa Kamara? Because if he did, he'd be starting. And this now is a really big question and issue for either January or the summer window. And it's obviously Monchi's preoccupation for the next several weeks and months. And you know Unai Emery will have a very specific profile, criteria, attributes, qualities already thought up that the scouting and recruitment department will now have to go and chase. And the question is, are you going to upgrade what is already, you know, a pretty decent squad? Because if you are, then that's a major signing, and probably January comes around too soon. If it's me, my gut tells me, I think they're going to be chasing a quality, technically and tactically gifted either number 10 type or a player who can play all those positions, the kind that can both see the pass and then make the pass. And I believe it's because of games precisely like the one on Sunday that we need that type of game changer. The other characteristic that I've always secretly been wishing for is more physical presence in the middle of the park. And that's not to say that Boubacar Kamara or John McGinn are lightweights. Far from it. Both of those players are extremely physical without having the stature necessarily. And you know, even Douglas Luiz, if you got into trouble in the back streets of Rio de Janeiro, I'd rather have Luiz with me than against me. Different kind of tough. Do you know what I'm saying? But I'm talking like the AAA gold standard Rodri at Manchester City. Here's a guy who's what, 6'3", 6'4", with the feather light touch, range of passing. He's fast, he can get on the end of things, and he would be a nightmare to defend from set pieces or anything for that matter. And then with Erling Haaland up the middle, look at your spine there. I mean, that would be so frustrating to have to deal with for 90 minutes. And the other position that we seem to be linked with often is a fullback. But if you're going to upgrade on Luca Dean, Alex Moreno, and Matty Cash, is it pace? Or is it somebody who is elite at both getting forward, but also snuffing things out defensively? And just like if you're looking for your dream home on a realtor site and they have the filters in the corner where you could break it down into 3-bedroom, 3-bathroom, enclosed garage, soaker tub, all of that. Well, Monchi's software and systems and AI-based, in some cases, statistical analysis Unai Emery will give them a criteria. He'll punch it all in. And I read when he came, it was like so specific, right down to top speed, proficiency with left foot, right foot, short range, medium range, long range, passing, everything. And it'll spit out 20 players per position. Then you start going into evaluation of cost and also, which is really important, I think, for both of them, senior professional level experience and even national team experience. Big issue number 2, away attitude. This issue has perplexed me for my entire life, and it's not exclusively a Premier League issue. This is a worldwide phenomenon. Over here, we have Villa Park, and 50 miles up the road, we have the City Ground. Both of these venues have the exact same, to the inch, pitch dimensions. 114.8 by 74.4, 114.8 by 74.4. The goals are the same size. The game is played by 22 men and 1 ball. And yet, over here, we are scoring at will. Over here, we looked like we could have played another 2 hours and never scored again. Same story at Newcastle, Liverpool, and at Warsaw. Does the home crowd give the home team that big an adrenaline rush that they run a little faster, pass a little bit more crisp, and are simply just more switched on than the other side? Because I could see a scenario by which the away team, the adversary, gets a huge amount of adrenaline and motivation for trying to be the spoiler with their own traveling support with them. It's just weird how it can be so different, and in the space of 1 week. You know what I did recently? I rewatched the Villa Forest game, the one I attended, which I had never seen before on television. And of course, we were watching from a suite in the Trinity, so this was shot on the other side of the field. And as you can imagine, your first ever trip to Villa Park for me, you know, it was this emotional and euphoric blur. Quite frankly, 1 minute I'm cheering an Ollie Watkins goal. The next I'm interviewing Tony Morley at some golf course. And then I'm out with Woodsy and Forest fan Dan at the Barton Arms. I mean, it was just this incredible dream that I drifted through. So to watch the game again was really interesting, and it's crazy how much I forgot, but I remember going through all the different moments and how I was feeling at the time, if that makes any sense. Jacob Ramsey might have had his worst performance in a Villa shirt that day, and then a week later, he might have been our best player. But in watching it again, our first goal early in the second half was extremely fortunate, and thanks in large part to a John Joe Shelby mistake, which Bertrand Traore pounced on. This was the game after he scored the incredible winner at Leicester, you may recall. But for the rest of the game, it sure looked an awful lot like it did on Sunday. Very organized, mid to low block. Not a lot of in-behind options or options over the top, and a very frustrated Aston Villa that was just trying to probe and trying to get through, around, or over. And for that, you got to tip your hat to Steve Cooper for having a very organized and difficult team to navigate. The only difference on that day was that they did not create the kind of chances or even get into the kind of situations that they got into a couple of times on Sunday. Still, there are examples at Forest where they fell after having a lead. You only have to go back a couple of weeks to see the Luton visit where they let a 2-goal lead slip, but we simply did not have the quality on the day in the critical moments, which is why Unai Emery is so obsessed with consistency as part of his cultural revolution. And consistency is 100% mental. And we all think of Emery as a tactician, a guy who works on the field and with video to get it right. But really, so much of what is happening culturally is about the mentality of his players, because a lot of fans ask the same question. Why couldn't we start the game with the same intensity that we ended it with? Why didn't we have the same urgency at 0-0 or 1-0 down than we did when we were already 2-0 down? And that is an issue that has to be addressed as part of this major cultural overhaul. So the good news, Paul Handsaker of 24/7 Services is hopping busy, thanks in part to Storm Kieran, which blew through recently, also a new project in Aberdeen, and another viewer of this program has engaged with his company to do their roof. And first of all, I want to make it very clear that 24/7 Services is not exclusively a roofing company. Yeah, the business was founded on the roof, but they do virtually everything else. But I can't thank you enough for having faith and belief in me when I recommend this company, and I would not be doing it if I did not believe in Paul, his team, and the quality of work they do. So thank you. That's the good news. The bad news is that Paul's daughters, Lily and Eve, are unable to attend the Fulham game live on Sunday, and why that matters is because those two girls have not seen Aston Villa lose live. Just wins. And apparently they have to go to their grandmother's 60th birthday party. I mean, there's another birthday next year. Isn't there, Nan? I mean, and wouldn't Villa Park be the perfect place to celebrate 60 years? Anyway, it's more than a roofing company. Anything you need, give them a call. Here are the numbers. It all starts with a fair estimation quote, and you can always find the numbers in the description of these videos. And the number one big moment that defined Forest 2, Villa 0, 5th minute failure. Upon taking a forensic view at the opening goal, it was easy to see what happened and how it all started. It was a change of possession in the attacking third for Villa, Forest's defensive third, when Nicolo Zaniolo and Douglas Luiz somehow got their wires crossed. And then crucially, we left a huge space in front of the penalty area, a succession of errors, never just one. But this is becoming a trend now. All of our losses have had early goals conceded at Newcastle, Liverpool, and at Warsaw. In fact, all 5 of our losses have seen us concede inside the first 15 minutes. And we should have known that Forest is one of the best teams in the Premier League at scoring early goals. So now the rest of the league knows you want to get after Villa, you want to cause problems, do it early. I don't want to pick on Nicolo Zaniolo here, but once again, the numbers on ball retention were not good, and I've talked about this way too much on this show. And the problem with numbers is that they are absolute. They are black and white. Zaniolo was dispossessed 4 times. He gave away 2 fouls, so now we're up to 6 changes in possession, and in 8 ground duel opportunities, he won but one of them. So he was either losing the ball or he was not winning it back in duels. And for a team that tries to control a game from minute 1 to 90, all those 13 moments add up, just like unforced errors in tennis, for example. That's one of the problems. Douglas Luiz, he was the closest to the ball and that massive space at the edge of the penalty area. I don't know if he was responsible for it or whether it was Boubacar Kamara, but I don't think the plan was to leave a giant gap at the edge of the box for a Forest players to step into and tee up on the football. And then we can look at the goal through the goalkeeper's lens. How ironic, of course, that in the same week that Emi Martinez was awarded with the highest honor for a goalkeeper outside of winning the World Cup, the Yassine Award, he has, by his own standards, not his greatest game of the season. And there will certainly have been some discussions in the goalkeeping debrief about the starting position on that 1-0 goal. He will say himself that he might have been one step too far to the left. It was very much like the Szoboszlai goal at Liverpool, where he's trying to look around players at the near post and left the far post wide open for what was a beautiful strike. Take nothing away. Hit with the instep, too. And nobody should be allowed to just tee one up and step into it like that. But from 25 yards, I'm telling you, Emi Martinez will be the first to put his glove up and say, I should have got a glove on that, at least. But then, just at the start of the half, over a minute in, after a halftime team talk where you know Unai Emery would have had some words, they make a substitution. They know they got to get off to a good start. Yes, it was a decent, solid strike, again, from about 25 yards. And yes, maybe somebody should have closed down faster. But after that, I am sorry, this is a goalkeeping error. Emi Martinez is in 2 minds. Do I push it over? Do I push it wide? Do I try to catch it? And he does none of the above, and he will be the first person to put his hand up and say, that is my fault. I should have had it. In a week where he was given the highest honor for a goalkeeper, the best in the world. He would have loved to have backed that up with a scintillating performance where he stood on his head, and instead there were really only 3 major actions involving him. One was a dribbler, which was easy. The other 2 didn't look the best on. So a 5 to 6 out of 10 type performance from one of our most important players. And by the way, he wasn't alone in the poor player ratings department. I had a commentary colleague one time, wonderful guy, had a lot of very old-fashioned sayings. He was like a walking cliche cupboard, a Geordie lad, great guy. And he used to say, if 2 of your 11 are not having a very good day, you might still win the game. But if 4 or 5 of your 11 are having an off day, you're going to have a hard time winning. And they're cliches because they're often true. And when I watched the game a second time, it was crystal clear who our man of the match was, in my opinion. It was Luca Dean, partially because his first touch is just so sublime right now, and he was trying to make things happen. Interesting, too, at a time when Alex Moreno is nearly back involved again. But after Dean, who stands out as the next player that showed something special? Nobody comes to mind. Like I said earlier, sometimes you have to suffer through the losses to really enjoy and savor the victories. And that is never more true when I have to go through this exercise and update these points that I've been following throughout the past few seasons. Our away form dips to 7 out of a possible 18 points now. No goals for Watkins or Diaby. Obviously, no set pieces. Didn't score first. Still stuck on 2 clean sheets. Our first and second half plus minuses took a hit. And for the first time this year, we lost to a bottom 6 side as they came around to us, so it's now 9 of a possible 12 points in that department. The silver lining coming off a performance and result like that is Aston Villa's demonstrated and consistent recent history of bouncing back right away and being good and winning the very next time out, which in this case on Thursday will come in handy because one way or another, that visit of Alkmaar to Villa Park will have major implications on Group E in the Conference League. And Emery was able to introduce a couple of legs that will probably start on Thursday, Yuri Tielemans and Diego Carlos, and he was able to rest some players at the end of that game as well, Matt Cash, Boubacar Kamara, and Douglas Luiz. And I guess that's the big question. How much rotation will we see? And I'd be shocked if it was more than the 4 we saw at Alkmaar a couple of weeks ago. Alkmaar had a very difficult challenge over the weekend, drawing 1-1 at Excelsior, and I'm going to be fascinated to see how they respond on Thursday to being humbled by Villa at home. And the way their players were talking us up afterwards, it was quite something to hear, the compliments, but I simply cannot believe that it's going to be as straightforward on Thursday as it was a couple of weeks ago in Holland. And let's hope that that Mostar team that showed up at Villa Park shows up at Legia, because a draw in that fixture would come in very handy, especially if we keep our home form humming on Thursday. Now, bringing it all the way back around to what I said at the beginning, my gratitude for football and what it means in my life and how much I love coaching. My U15s recently got promoted because we had such a good start to the season. And on Saturday, we won our first game in Division 2, thanks to, first of all, a fantastic break by a kid named Rehan Malik, who then slotted home at the end of a powerful run. The game was then tied shortly after, and very, very late, Gavin Espinoza picks up the ball in the box and with his left foot slots home for the game winner. There is nothing more gratifying than the stuff you work on in training manifesting itself on Saturday. And in this case, it was about not always trying to welly the ball in the box, but placing it, hitting the target, slotting it. And what do the boys do? They execute. And that's why I couldn't live without football, that rush and that adrenaline. And I'm sure it's the exact same thing for Aston Villa, what you do in the training ground coming off on the weekend. Although if Matt Cash says the boss makes wins sometimes feel like losses, imagine what it must feel like at Bodymore Heath after you lose. Going to be a tough couple of days around the training ground. Until the visit of Alkmaar, be well. Try to get some daylight if you can. And as always, up the mighty Villa.